work across the aisle. He serves on some very important committees, the Appropriations Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, Judiciary, Small Business, and of course, very close to the new president. He succeeded the new president in the Senate, and it's been, I know, a proud moment for Delaware, his home state. So we're honored to have you here today with us, Chris.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Van. I am so grateful for the chance to be with you and with today's audience. To Randy and the Atlantic Council, thank you for your leadership in finding a positive path forward on energy solutions. Van, you and Dream Corps give me hope every day, playing a very small role in supporting your efforts on criminal justice reform, gave me some optimism and confidence as we talked about once many years ago when I was a child. My father did prison ministry as a volunteer, and seeing from my very earliest days the ways in which incarceration in this country has led not to correction or improvement or criminal justice, but instead to terrible lasting impacts on Black and brown communities in particular for a generation, to now see what had been the uniform headlong rush towards tougher and tougher and longer sentences being reversed at the state and federal level, and smarter policy around criminal justice that can keep us all safer, but yet actually invest in people is hugely encouraging to me. And Kelly, it was a real blessing to serve with you here in the Congress. You may know I'm actually sitting in what was John McCain's former office. One of our first efforts overseas, Kelly and I traveled to Afghanistan and Egypt and Israel together on a trip led by John. And he left a lasting impression on me in terms of what it looks like to bring in people from other perspectives. He and Joe Biden were lifelong friends. They disagreed on almost every foreign policy matter, and forcefully and vociferously. But John also had a graciousness of heart and a patriotism and a dedication to our country that continues to challenge me to this day. And Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions is a great partner in this conversation. Also, the American Conservation Coalition that Benji Backer leads. I just had the chance to meet with him not too long ago in Wilmington, Delaware, when he stopped by. It is exciting to me to see the broad coalition of folks from across our country, young and old, rural and urban, conservative and progressive, Black, brown, white, gay, straight, Latino, of every background, seeing folks come together around finding solutions. The biggest existential threat we face as a nation and a world is climate change. And I represent literally the lowest mean elevation state. I have arguments with senators from Florida and Louisiana, but yep, we have the lowest, highest point of any state. And we are really flat, and the piece of rock that Delaware sits on is sliding into the ocean. So sea level rise has an impact all along our coastline. It's impacted everything from our rural and agricultural portions to our urban portions. Environmental justice is a live and very real issue for Delaware, where our African-American community has struggled with emissions and pollution and groundwater issues for generations, and for the most rural parts of our state, where saltwater intrusion into our aquifers and impacts of climate events, of storms, have really changed the future of our agriculture. So let me just close by saying how excited I am. Wednesday's inauguration, at which my friend and predecessor Joe Biden called on all of us to re-examine our path forward and called for unity, inspired me. He has made climate one of his top priorities and intends to take bold action. And Kelly, as you just referenced, Senator Mike Braun and I have pulled together a 14-member bipartisan climate solutions caucus. Mike is a very conservative, relatively new Republican senator from the southernmost part of Indiana, the coal mining part, and his willingness to step forward along with 12 other senators and say climate change is real, it's caused by people, and we must take bold market solutions to address it, has encouraged me with the prospects for change. So let's get to your questions. Thank you for including me today.
Well, first of all, thank you for your work and your leadership, and also congratulations to you and Delaware. But let's get into it. I mean, why is this the time? And why can't Republicans and Democrats come together on this? Everybody knows the reasons that we fight about it. You've been able to figure out with 14 senators a way for people to come together. How have attitudes changed? What's bringing people together? Why do you have any confidence this thing can actually work?
Well, first is just the practical evidence right in front of us. Despite years of climate denial, a well-funded, well-orchestrated, and I think profoundly malign effort over decades to question, challenge, and undermine the scientific analysis that has led to a near uniform conclusion in the scientific community that our climate is changing and changing dramatically, and because of human activity. That debate here in Congress has been overrun by facts on the ground. We had the hottest year on record last year. The American people began last year seeing unbelievable fires all over Australia and then all over the Western United States, and then a record number of hurricanes. It doesn't matter where you live in our country or world, you're seeing the impacts of climate on our forests, on sea life, like the lobsters of New England, on when spring comes, on how mild winter is, and it's having significant impacts. So whether it's talking to farmers or talking to folks who live in low-lying areas in Delaware, the reality of climate change has made believers of the people in my state. And frankly, there's also been change in the private sector. We've now got groups like the Business Roundtable and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce saying that climate change is real and urging support for market-based solutions like a price on carbon. We've had a change of heart in the faith community. There's a broad range of communities of believers of different faith traditions saying that as stewards of the planet, those who view this as a created planet, we have an obligation to improve our stewardship. And then frankly, last, we're hearing from folks who haven't been a part of this conversation before. So the American Farm Bureau, for example, recently came out in support of the Growing Climate Solutions bill that Kelly just referenced. So why is this the time? Both because it's getting hotter faster than anyone had imagined and we're seeing the real world impacts, and because we're seeing players come to the table who previously had been resisting accepting the reality of climate change.
So Chris, as we think about where we are right now, what's a good success story you can tell us about with this caucus working together? I know that there was an important piece in the COVID relief bill on climate. So can you share that with us, and just what do you see happening, not just in the US, but around the world?
Sure. First, around the world, I am so excited that we've rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. 5 years ago, I was in Paris with a Democrat-only delegation. I thought it was unfortunate, deeply, that at the Paris Convention, the COP, the Conference of Parties, there was a Republican delegation that was there to say climate change is not real, and a Democratic delegation there to say sign it, sign it, sign it. I am hoping, along with Senator Braun and many of the members of our Climate Solutions Caucus, to co-lead a bipartisan delegation to Glasgow this coming fall for COP26. And I think it's past time for the United States to regain our global leadership position in developing and deploying clean energy technologies and taking advantage of the dramatically expanding world market for electric vehicles, for carbon capture and sequestration technology, for advanced modular nuclear technology. You asked for some positive examples. I'll give you two briefly. One of my favorite friends is Reggie. Reggie is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. There's 11 states that formed a regional, I'm sorry?
I said we're a member too, New Hampshire. So it's good.
New Hampshire, one of the proud early members. And it has reduced emissions from the power sector by 45% since 2008, and then invest those proceeds in clean energy. You asked about an important piece of the end of year bill. It was the Energy Act of 2020, ably led by our friend Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. It was actually dozens of bills that had been worked on for years. 5 of them were my bills. And briefly, they assist low-income households with energy retrofits to improve energy efficiency. One promoted commercialization of clean energy technology. Another would make federal buildings, and there's a lot of federal buildings, more energy efficient. Another would promote carbon capture and sequestration. It was a very significant, it's probably the biggest energy policy bill in 8 years. But we have to remain committed to delivering on legislative solutions like that by working across the aisle.
Thanks.
There's still those people who think, well, if you're going to do anything good for the environment, for the earth, you're going to wreck the economy, and people are going to have to choose between having a job and having a healthy economy. What do you say to people who still have that fear?
I'd say it's a false choice, Van. One of my favorite programs from back in the days when I was a county executive is the Weatherization Assistance Program. In states like New Hampshire, where the costs of energy are really high, it is particularly low-income people who spend way too much of their money on old, outdated, inefficient homes that they either own or rent that just leak energy out into the environment. The Weatherization Assistance Program pays for energy efficiency retrofits, which creates jobs. The work that the WAP helps finance, that's done by local carpenters and electricians and plumbers and pipe fitters and tradesmen. That's work that can't be outsourced. It's good work that's done at the local level. It creates high-wage union jobs in my state and in many states around the country. And it's the sort of thing that can both help the environment and create jobs. At the higher level, we have the opportunity, again, for high-skilled, high-wage jobs in offshore wind and in solar and in the construction of electric vehicles and in modernizing the grid and in building pipelines at every level across our country. If we are successful in carbon capture and sequestration, we're going to end up needing carbon dioxide pipelines to take them from the site of emission to where they're going to get put into the ground. I had an interesting conversation with Bill Cassidy the other day. He is a conservative Republican from Louisiana, and he's getting his head around the idea that Louisiana, which is a major oil and gas state, has thousands of people working in oil and gas. And he said, we just happen to have the right geologic structures for putting carbon dioxide into the ground and keeping it there for a very, very long time. I'm saying to folks in my state, you've got a great paying job right now building pipelines to move oil. You could have a great paying job building and sustaining pipelines that move carbon dioxide. What's the difference? You don't know what's in the pipe. It's still a great job. And I thought that was a fascinating insight from a Republican colleague.
Well, I hadn't heard that before. I'm sorry, Senator.
I just wanted to follow up on that, Senator Coons, just to ask about why now? So it's great, the caucus that you've been able to lead with Senator Braun, but what makes you encouraged? How do we bring more players to the table? You talked about Bill Cassidy and the ideas that he had maybe for Louisiana. What else can be done? Because obviously in the Senate to build an even broader coalition, that's important if we want lasting change.
Well, look, I'll be blunt, Kelly. You understand how politics works. It's extremely helpful to have the voices of young people, of young conservatives and young progressives demanding action now. It's also helpful to have new players, to have the American Farm Bureau, which has not been a progressive voice on climate change, now standing up and urging that we take up and pass the Growing Climate Solutions Bill, which I think will be the first Climate Solutions Caucus led and endorsed bill that'll get passed in this Congress. That really helps to have the faith community raising their voices across the spectrum. That really helps. But frankly, hearing from the forces that have often financed and underwritten climate denial in the past, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and to some extent the Business Roundtable, taking a very different approach and saying, we see this change is coming. It's unavoidable. We would prefer a market solution to a command and control solution, and then getting engaged, getting forceful, investing in that. That's going to send signals. An ambitious generation of young politicians, Republican and Democrat, need to hear these messages. That's why I'm so thrilled to have had this chance to talk with you this morning and to see everything that you're doing to create the space for a bipartisan solution.
Well, listen, I want to just thank you for your leadership. It's really hard. Some of these issues, they just take a while to get right. And in the meantime, you seem like you might be, swimming upstream, but you got nothing but patience and persistence on this thing. And I just wonder, you did mention the environmental justice concerns that you have, and you mentioned weatherization. Can you just give a special word to communities that are impacted by racism, impacted by other forms of bigotry, bias? People have been left out in some ways of this pollution-based economy when it comes to jobs. How can we make sure that the people are included and some of these new clean and green jobs that are coming on, these kind of industries of tomorrow? I know it's important to you.
So one of the projects I've been really passionate about in Wilmington impacts the community of Southbridge. Southbridge is probably 95% Black community, very low income, and immediately proximate to our state's largest waste dump. There was heavy manufacturing there for years that polluted the ground and the water. And because of the way the water table sits and because of sea level rise, every basement in Southbridge has flooded for years. Through the NOAA National Coastal Resilience Fund, our mayor and our city council and our congressional delegation worked really hard to assemble millions of dollars. And we've just completed a very large, more than several hundred acre wetland restoration in South Wilmington that is going to provide healthy recreation, promote commerce, and prevent flooding. It's essentially green infrastructure that takes all of that stormwater and polluted water out of Southbridge and filters it out. The challenge for us is making sure that everything that we do in the Biden administration and in this Congress looks at job creation opportunities, community reinvestment opportunities, infrastructure resiliency opportunities through the lens that certain communities in our country have borne the brunt of pollution for generations. And whether it's improving air quality, reducing flooding, or taking pollutants out of our food and our ground, we have to prioritize that going forward. I know Joe's heart. Joe came into public service in Delaware because of the riots after Martin Luther King was assassinated. He had a comfortable job at a law firm. He left to become a public defender and run for office. We have a tragic and challenging racial history in Delaware that Joe knows deeply. He is committed as our president to look at all of these issues, and climate is one of them at the top of the list, with a lens that also addresses racial inequality and injustice. It has been baked into how this nation has been built, and it needs to be taken out of the future of our country. And creating real opportunities for a cleaner future and a more inclusive and equitable future is a lot of what drives me and a lot of what drives our president.
Well, if we could sneak one last one in here, there's a lot of questions in the chat about the electrification of cars and vehicles and that kind of stuff. I don't know if you can slide one of those in under the buzzer, but there's a lot of people interested in that, I believe.
Look, one of the easiest next jumps we're going to make in technology is to take the internal combustion engine off the roads of the United States. It is happening rapidly globally. Delaware was a state that had 2 large auto manufacturing plants. Joe Biden, as the vice president, was a part of President Obama's historic investments to save American auto manufacturing. And the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus has met with the CEOs of Ford and GM. They are moving rapidly towards electrification of their fleets. We need to meet them by building the recharging infrastructure, but the impact that will have on manufacturing, on air quality, on fuel consumption and efficiency will be significant. I'm really excited to see us move from the demonstration stage, where a few people have Teslas and there's a few electric buses in cities, to it being the standard and the norm. It will take energy and investment and optimism, but I'm confident we can do it and create high-skilled, high-wage manufacturing jobs in our country as a result.
Thank you. We know that you've got a hard stop, Senator Coons, but thank you again for your leadership, and we look forward to what you and Senator Braun are going to forge together, along with the other members of the caucus, and bringing others in, not only in the Senate, but we hope in the House, and that will transition us to our next panel of House members. So thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Van. Great to be with you both.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you, Senator Coons, and thank you for your leadership on the Senate Climate Solutions Caucus. It really is crucial work. We're now going to move to the second portion of our program. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome Representatives McEachin, Curtis, and LaHood. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. For those in the audience, we will be taking questions through the Q&A portal on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and Van and Kelly will try to get to as many of these as we can. So Van and Kelly, back to you.
Thank you. So let me kick it off. We have today with us some great members of Congress from both sides of the aisle. We have Congressman McEachin, Congressman LaHood, and Congressman Curtis. So I'd like to turn it all over to them and ask them, starting off, how can we find some bipartisan climate solutions in the Congress to uplift Americans, whether you live in an urban area or whether you live in a rural area, thinking about the challenges that we face right now economically, but also making sure that we build, a fair and strong economy while protecting our environment.
I'll jump in. Thank you, first of all, to everybody who's been part of putting this together. Let me just bring up a point that we don't talk about a lot, and that is to answer your question about how we engage more bipartisan work. I think we have to reevaluate how we're talking about this issue. I don't mind telling you that my Republican colleagues, well, let me put it this way. If we started an immigration discussion mandating that people weigh in on whether or not they think the wall is a good idea, it's going to quickly devolve and not be a very productive discussion. And I worry too often that we use this litmus test of the climate changing, which, to be honest, my Republican colleagues fell at, and my Democrat colleagues push and prod it too much. And then we never have that productive discussion. I worry that there's too much what I call shaming. And what I mean by that is when somebody's started their path down being better with the environment, we always tell them it's not enough, instead of thanking them for getting engaged and involved. And I really think, as I view some of my Republican colleagues, that they want to engage, they want to have these discussions, but they quickly get uncomfortable and don't feel like there's any place for them at the table.
Thank you for setting the stage there from the Republican perspective. If I can go over to Congressman McEachin and ask him also, what's your perspective on this and how we can work together?
Well, I'm exceedingly optimistic about the possibilities of us working together. And one of the reasons is that in every dark cloud, there's a silver lining. And of course, we all know how COVID has devastated our economy. We all agree that we're going to have to rebuild our economy. And I think one way that we can do that is through an aggressive and bold infrastructure plan, but not just any old ordinary infrastructure plan, a green infrastructure plan where we're rehabbing our buildings, where we're, as Senator Cruz said, putting electrical vehicles on the road, where we are literally looking at every aspect of infrastructure, whether it's bridges, roads, buildings, schools, broadband, and looking at it, repairing it, or in some places implementing it, especially when we're talking about broadband in rural areas, and making sure that we're doing it in a 21st century way with an eye towards the economy, with an eye towards a green economy. That's going to create jobs. I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that that'll create millions and millions of jobs. And I think that we all know that the unemployed and those people who are suffering in this country don't necessarily have a D or an R beside their name. They're just Americans. They're our constituents. They're located in every district, in every state in the union. And that, I think, will help bring us together to make sure that we are working in a bipartisan way to repair the economy. And in so doing, we will be repairing our environment, this wonderful, and preserving this wonderful gift that we call the earth.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's a lot of ideas there that I think both sides of the aisle can really get around. I know we also have Congressman LaHood, who is, I actually serve on the board of Caterpillar, so there's a big company, and even at the corporate level at Caterpillar, we think about sustainability, and those are reports we get from the top. So thank you, Congressman LaHood, and thank you for your service. And can you add just where do you see some common ground here in thinking about representing a company like Caterpillar or any of your other constituents?
Well, thanks, Senator Ayotte. And let me just acknowledge and thank everybody that helped put this event together today. Mr. Jones and you, Senator Ayotte, and the Citizens for Responsible Solutions, Energy Solutions, the Atlantic Council, and the Dream Corps, and also my colleagues, John Curtis and Don McEachin. It's great to be on with you today to have this discussion and dialogue. And it's important that we have it. And you know, looking ahead, obviously hearing President Biden's message of unity and coming together presents opportunities. I think we're looking for those opportunities as Republicans on how we can work together. And clearly climate is one of those areas where we can do that. You know, we all come from different perspectives, usually based on our constituency. And I think it's unique that today we have folks, whether it's John Curtis from Utah or Mr. McEachin from Florida or Senator Coons from Delaware, or myself from Peoria, Illinois, where I am today. I'm very proud that I have the largest concentration of Caterpillar workers anywhere in the world right here in Peoria in the heartland. But we represent different areas. And so we come from different perspectives as we look at this. And I would just say this, as we look at ways we can find common ground, I think if you look at the election in November, which was obviously a very partisan election, very disruptive in a lot of ways, but this country is divided. The Senate is 50-50. Of course, the House is the closest governing majority in about 120 years. And we saw in the presidential race. So I think we got to be careful about how far we go. And I think one thing that came out of the election is, you know, things to the far left or the far right didn't work. Defunding police didn't work. Medicare for all didn't work. And the new Green Deal, frankly, didn't work. So how do we find a reasonable approach, that common ground in the middle to find solutions on climate? And, you know, the examples to criminal justice reform, which I proudly supported, is a good one that of course, you, Senator Ayotte, and Van Jones talked about. I spent 10 years as a state and federal prosecutor in a prior life and supported criminal justice reform because it was the right thing to do. But remember, criminal justice reform just affects the federal system, affects 10 to 15% of our prison population. So it's a small step, but we have a long ways to go. And it sets an example for lots of other states on what we can do. Same way with climate. I think if we focus on things that have worked, right? Technology, innovation. You know, Kelly, you talked about Caterpillar. Caterpillar has done some really good innovation on how they reform their engines, looking at CAFE standards that the federal government has helped with, emissions control. Those are things that have worked from a market-based solution. And so I think if there's dialogue and discussion, not necessarily on the new Green Deal, but more in the middle, I think that's the approach that will help get us to where we need to go.
Very good.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Van. Appreciate all of your comments.
Yes. Well, it really is just exciting to be starting off the year. We just got a new president. We're having a new conversation, and I do think it's important for us to remember and to recognize that a lot of stuff, as we said, that was considered impossible is possible. And I wonder, what are some of the success stories that you've seen, any of you, all of you, in terms of being able to bring down pollution and bring up economic opportunity? I think that's the center of the bullseye. If you can reduce pollution and increase economic solutions, it's hard for people to argue with us. But I wonder, have any of the three of you seen anything that gives you reason for hope or encouragement?
Well, this is unusual to have three congressmen in a pause.
That's good.
Let me just jump in and tell you a really fun story in my district. I represent a county, and the name of the county is Carbon County. So you might imagine how they've made their livelihood for decades and decades and decades. And to be honest, they're struggling. They were struggling before the pandemic, and the pandemic has made it even worse. These are amazing Americans. They work hard. They're smart. They're dedicated. They're great family people. But they've seen an economy, and it's really not even government regulation. It's simply natural gas has wiped out their way of life, if that makes sense. And we had some really talented people in the state put together what they call the Coal Strike Force Task Team. And their goal was to increase employment in the region by 10%. And they have been amazingly resourceful. My county commissioners in that area, they have almost no resources, but they've put together this amazing research facility to study other uses for coal and how to burn coal more efficiently. And it is just really fun for me to see them take this positive outlook that the world's changing. They're not going to be left behind, and not just themselves, but other people coming in to help them and support them. And I think that's got to be a story we tell across America.
The electric vehicle market. And that's going to continue to grow, as we've heard on this conversation, and Senator Coons mentioned that.
Those are very inspiring stories, and you mentioned that you have nuclear. There's some folks who are in the audience who have questions about, is smart nuclear a common ground solution? Is that considered something that might be necessary? Certainly, Biden has mentioned he's open to nuclear as a part of the mix. Even Senator Cory Booker has spoken about clean, smart, advanced nuclear as a part of the mix. Is that common ground? Is there openness to that from your point of view, any of you?
Well, I'll kick it off on we have, as Democrats, chided our Republican colleagues by saying you have to follow the science. You have to follow the science. Science will dictate what the solutions are. Well, we have to look ourselves in the mirror sometimes and say the same thing. Science is going to have to determine what the solution is to the climate crisis. I have the privilege of sitting on the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House, and I can tell you that I cannot recall one hearing, not one, that suggested that nuclear would not be a part of getting us from where we need to be from here to 2050. Nuclear is going to have to be a part. We need to make sure it's safe, it's as modern as possible. This new nuclear technology holds out some promise, but we have to be prepared to say, both to the left and to the right, follow the science. And the science that I've heard, and if someone wants to show me something different, I'm open. But the science that I've heard and the science that I've seen suggests that nuclear has to be part of our future.
Does that open up some room for some common ground? I'd love to hear from our Republican colleagues here.
Yeah, I had a conversation.
Go ahead, John.
Okay. I had a conversation with some colleagues, some legislators in the United Kingdom last week, and they were touting their advances with renewables. And I said, well, we struggle here a little bit with base load. And I'm curious, as your renewables have grown, how have you dealt with a base load? Because if not careful, that becomes coal. And they just smiled and they said nuclear. And I think we've got to realize not only what my good friend from Richmond said. By the way, I'm a former resident of Richmond, Congressman. And
good to know. Come on back sometime.
It's a wonderful place. Not only what he said about the science of it, but you've got to factor in this base load issue, and that there are very few sources for base load, and nuclear is a wonderful option for that. And I might also say, we don't have to make this decision based on the nuclear we know today. We can make this decision based on the nuclear that we want in the future, the smart nuclear, that the next generation of nuclear.
Representative LaHood, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I would just add, I would agree with the comments of both my colleagues there, Van. I would also add, Don talked about following the science. It's interesting. Bill Gates is a big proponent of the new nuclear energy initiative and some of the new technology there, and has been very active in the space, has been to DC many times. So it's interesting to hear his perspective, which I think lots of people respect in many different ways. But there are advocates out there that are against nuclear, as you're well aware, Van, and are working against it at every turn. And so, when you talk about following the science, who's saying it? What do you believe, right? But yeah, I'm obviously a supporter. When we talk about, again, all of the above energy approach, nuclear has to be a part of that. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee and a sponsor of a bill on a nuclear tax credit bill, which has broad bipartisan support in the Ways and Means Committee and across our conference. But there are some things that we have to do to help upgrade our nuclear fleet, to work on new technologies that are out there. I think if we're willing to do that, I think it'll be good for the country long term.
I'm going to give it back over to Senator Ayotte, but it's so scary on the progressive side, the idea of nuclear, concerned about accidents, concerned that the mining is going to hurt Native Americans, et cetera. And I don't think the word has gotten out that there's really been a leapfrog change in some of the technologies. And so I do think that if that's going to be a part of the mix, a lot of education is going to have to take place, because I think people really are still quite afraid. But Senator Ayotte, do you think I'm right on that? And what?
Yeah,
what do you think?
I think you're absolutely right, Van. And I think if you look at the technology is like miles ahead of where it was when we've had obviously Fukushima, some of these other disasters that have occurred. And that brings me, I think, to a question that I see in the chat. How do we lead in the U.S. on innovation and technology, and how can that impact us? Our competitiveness around the world. And I think that some of the leadership, even in the technology and the development in nuclear, is an example. But I think of issues out there like the grid. How do we make the grid more resilient? That's another question we got in the chat. And isn't there some common ground that we can find there? What can we do also to help accelerate, other countries who maybe are still relying on fossil fuels more than us? How can we bring them along with technology? So let me turn it over to all of you just to get your thoughts on issues like how do we incentivize technology and development and innovation, and what can Congress do to help that piece? What do we do also when we think about things like the grid? Is that a piece where we can find some common ground on resilience? So I'll turn it over to our three congressmen and have you kind of engage on those issues. Just a few questions. Grab anyone you want.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. I'm trying to let my colleagues go first, but this is a topic that I just feel passionate about. And let me just say, particularly to my conservative colleagues who struggle with some of these issues, this should be your entry point. If you can't get excited about U.S. technology leading around the world with clean, green technology, if nothing else, just rely on good capitalism, right? There's money to be made here. And so I hope this can be a good entry point for a lot of Republicans, because I believe absolutely in American innovation, that we can lead the world with innovation in green technology and have it be, you talk about it being good for our economy. This is exactly where it hits home. I think we have to keep a couple of things in mind. One is this technology will only be adopted overseas if it's the low-cost alternative, right? If we want to have any hope of getting China off of their coal plants, we've got to innovate in a way that we've got a lower-cost alternative that is better for the environment than what they're currently using. And I think part of what needs to happen is government, quite frankly, needs to get out of the way. We're over-regulating in a lot of these categories. And if you unleash that American innovation and ingenuity, I have no doubt this could be a broad part of our answer, not just to reducing US carbon emissions, but world carbon emissions.
I don't have much issue with what Mr. Curtis just said. With the exception of what does it mean to get out of the way? And of course, I can imagine that can cause a lot of conversation and perhaps even some controversy. But there's no doubt that America is the most innovative nation on the planet. There's no doubt in my mind that our ability to innovate can result in, as the representative said, monies to be made. That we can, if necessary, export those technologies to third world countries that might need our help in terms of being able to keep up with climate solutions. But as we think about getting out of the way, we always have to remember that there's a group of people, and I'm not suggesting that Mr. Curtis isn't thinking about this, but I just want to put it on the table, that there's a group of people who tend to be disenfranchised, who are either poor, well, uniformly they're poor, but sometimes they're poor white, poor black, poor brown, poor indigenous folks who sometimes bear the brunt of the government getting out of the way. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. We want to make sure that those communities, I call them environmental justice communities, that those communities are protected as we make sure these innovative products hit the market as we see innovation explode across the planet. And again, I'm not suggesting for a second that Mr. Curtis isn't thinking about that. I just want to make sure that that is part of our conversation and part of our thought process as we think about government getting out of the way.
Well, Senator Ayotte, I would just add a couple things. One, when we talk about upgrading the electrical grid and other ways to work on infrastructure related to technology and innovation, obviously, I think an infrastructure bill, of course, when we think about infrastructure, we think about traditional transportation infrastructure, roads, bridges, highways, tunnels, rapid transit systems. But I think there's also an opportunity. I think, frankly, it's a deficiency of the Trump administration. We never passed an infrastructure bill. We never got one done. And I know President Biden, that's something that he feels strongly about. And I think there's an opportunity there to work on upgrading the electrical grid and to invest in some of these energy technologies and to work on that. So I think there's a real opportunity there to do that. Secondarily, obviously, President Biden rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. The one thing you referenced, how do we hold countries like China and India and Pakistan accountable? I think it's a great question. I think it's frustrating when you look at the progress that our country has made, much of it in the private sector with technology and energy solutions and innovation, and how we've, by every measure, whether it's clean air or clean water or, moving to battery-based and other energy sources, we've done that in the U.S., but a lot of countries around the world haven't done that. So what's the enforcement mechanism? How do we get China and India to get away from fossil fuels and coal burning? I don't think we've seen good progress on that or evidence that that's being done. And that's frustrating to a lot of Republicans in that we're doing all these things and we're abiding by it, but they continue to violate the rules. There's no accountability. So how do you hold them accountable? How do you make them responsible? They haven't had a good track record of doing that. I think if we can show there is an enforcement mechanism or a way to do that, I think that will satisfy many of the critics that are frustrated about what others are doing around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman LaHood. I think opportunity to build alliances there around that so that you become an outlier if you aren't, you're ostracized, that's the piece working together, I hope, as we deal with this issue going forward. And turn it back to Van.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. We kind of wound up a little bit now on the world stage. This whole idea of the United States being a leader and not a laggard, even if other folks, maybe don't want to keep up or to Representative LaHood's point, want to cheat or act bad. Sometimes we can just get so far out ahead that we wind up dominating these markets. I wonder, what role do you see government playing in helping to make us the most competitive 21st century energy sector? I'm the guy that coined the term green jobs. I now wish I hadn't coined it because it's become so partisan. I just now say 21st century jobs, 21st century infrastructure. I never say green because now green used to be the common ground color. Now that seems to be have gone away. So how do we get into a position where we are the global leader? And what roles of government do you think are appropriate and helpful? Because that's really going to be, I think, the final cornerstone. Nobody wants the United States to be in falling behind any other country on the 21st century technology.
Well, Van, I'll start off and see what I can do with that question. I want to go back to the notion of an infrastructure plan. I think that's a great example of what government can do. We set out essentially a demand that the country needs to go in this direction, and we let the free market help us get in that direction. As we do that, I would suggest to you that just natural American ingenuity and tendencies to innovate will take over. We will find that we are coming up with, if we make sure that there's enough R&D money in the mix, we'll find that we're coming up with technologies that we don't even think about right now, because some young person or even some old person somewhere says, hey, I've got an idea. Let me take this R&D money and create this product or that product. And that'll help us take carbon out of the air. That'll help us sequester carbon in the ground. So what we need to do in government is to create the environment, put out the demand for services, if you will, and Americans will take over. And I would suggest to you that that's how we stay in the lead worldwide, because again, once Americans get to the business of innovating, there's nobody who can keep up with us.
Is that an outlier view, or do conservatives and Republicans agree with Representative McKitchen?
His last word would be a great way to summarize this whole thing, and that is nobody can keep up with us when, I'm paraphrasing, but nobody can keep up with us when we're on our game and doing our best. And I might just suggest, we're not always the leader on this around the world, but one area where we could break through and be a leader is exactly what we're doing today, and what this forum's trying to do, which is come together on a bipartisan basis to work to solve these issues. As I talk to my colleagues around the world, this is divisive all over the world, so I just would really like to compliment those who put this together and my colleagues on both sides of this issue that came together today, because if we want to lead in the world, it will be on a bipartisan basis, and that's where we'll be at our best.
Representative LaHood, I want to ask you a question. I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding between communities of color and conservatives on this issue. We want economic development desperately. We want jobs desperately. We want contracts. We want our entrepreneurs to have a real shot. I feel that we talk a lot about help. We don't talk enough about opportunity in terms of how you get communities out of poverty. My dad was born, very poor in Orange Mound, Memphis, at that time one of the biggest ghettos in the South. Joined the military to get out of poverty. Put himself through college, a little black college called Lane College at Jackson, Tennessee. He married the college president's daughter, my mother, because my dad was no dummy. And he went on to he put his brother through college, his cousins through college. My dad, everybody that pretty much in my family got out of poverty on this bridge called my father's back. And he really was frustrated with both Republicans and Democrats, because he said you need some liberal programs and interventions in the marketplace, whether that be scholarships or youth programs or affirmative action, whatever you need. But you also need good conservative traditional work ethic, good conservative traditional family ethic, sobriety, et cetera, to take advantage of those programs. He says, nobody's talking to each other. We really, really want to, if you're fighting poverty, you need both. And I think that sometimes we don't communicate enough on the opportunity side. And there's a sense that there's just an entitlement being requested as opposed to real opportunity. Can this be some common ground in terms of ending this racial strife, where we all come together and say, let's create opportunity for people who want to come up and out of poverty, especially looking at these African-American and other communities that have been a little bit, have not been a little bit, have been really left out in the past. Is there a conversation to be had here, is what I'm asking you, Representative LaHood, about opportunity for up and out of poverty and both sides coming together on that under this clean energy revolution umbrella?
Yeah, well, Van, thanks for that. And thanks for sharing your story. That's an American dream, what you just described there, and many have experienced that. And that's what makes our country unique, and how you can be successful regardless of where you come from in this country. And the answer is yes. Frankly, this conversation we're having today, we need to have more of these in Congress with our members of Congress and do that. And, to your point, Van, I look at it, this country does well when the private sector is flourishing and doing well and people are making money and there's opportunities. And figuring out the role of government in that balance in this is what is important. And I think, what is that right balance? What is the reasonableness that we need in government when it comes to climate? Not going to the far left, not going to the far right, figuring out how we find that balance. I think that's going to be the key and kind of the sweet spot on how we do that. But I think that conversation needs to be had. There are Republicans and Democrats of like mind that want to get there. But it's hard to get to that sweet spot. But we talked about it. Criminal justice reform is a good example. I mean, you go back to the 1990s, what President Clinton did with welfare reform, very controversial on both sides, but they got to a point where they could agree on it. There are things there are success stories at doing that, but more of these conversations, more of these debates, I think are important. And hopefully we can do that in the Congress moving forward.
Well, thank you. Do we have any more time? I can't tell if I got so enraptured in what you were saying that I took my eyes off the prize. We have another minute or two, don't we, Senator? You have any more questions?
Maybe one more minute, and we keep getting some questions about carbon capture and sequestration. So I'm going to throw that one and just throw that quickly out to. And if there's also, I also got a specific question for you, Congressman Curtis, on geothermal. So I'm just going to throw out some ideas and jump on in.
Okay, I don't know where to go. I obviously have to be quick. Geothermal is something that we need to learn more about. I have some of it here in my district. Some of it's been successful, some of it has not. But it clearly is something that is worth a greater look and something we need to spend more time on. Carbon capture, I'm in. Count me in. I mean, you talk about U.S. innovation. We've got to do this. That is probably the quickest way to reduce carbon outside the United States, right? We talk about what's happening in China and India with their coal. We can constrict and limit our coal here, but unless we can get to carbon sequestration, I don't think we're going to make a big impact overseas.
Great, thanks. Congressman McEachin and Congressman LaHood, do you want to jump in real quick? And I think there's some common ground there on some of those technologies.
I would say that, again, I find myself agreeing with, at least with what Mr. Curtis said in terms of our carbon capture and carbon sequestration. And again, I really have to turn to my left and tell some of my colleagues that are a little bit to the left of me that we have to follow the science. There's no way to get from point A to point B by 2050 unless we're going to capture some carbon, unless we're going to be able to put it in the ground somewhere or somewhere else safe. The fear is that we'll use carbon capture as a reason just to keep putting carbon into the air because we know we can capture it and pull it out. I don't think that fear necessarily needs to materialize. I think the Congress can, as we've been saying a lot lately, walk and chew gum at the same time. That is, we can provide a scenario where carbon capture is a good thing, that we've incentivized it, as well as make sure that we're not pumping additional carbon into the air at the same time. So obviously the challenge is in the details, but I agree with what my colleague had to say.
Thanks, and I know we're up against time. Congressman LaHood, do you agree what you heard from your colleagues on this technologies?
Yeah, Senator Ayotte, the only thing that I would add is, we've touched on this a little bit. How do we use the tax code to incentivize more R&D research? How do we help these companies to innovate more? I mean, there's real success stories in these private sector companies where we have, again, allowed them through the tax code to do that in a market-based approach. And I think the more we do that, building on those successes, whether it's tax credits, whether it's incentives, and again, making sure that all of the country feels the effects of this, whether it's jobs or whether it's opportunities, whether it's in our urban areas, our suburban areas, or our rural areas. It's an important point that both Van and Don have made that I think has to be part of the conversation. But I do think, again, focusing, and we've done that a lot on the Ways and Means Committee in a bipartisan way, those tax incentives, those tax structures to continue to innovate, have clean technology, and come up with new initiatives.
Thanks, Van. I don't know how you feel, but I kind of feel like we get these three excellent congressmen in the room, they can solve a lot of problems for us, right?
I know.
And we could bring Senator Coons there too, and we probably get some stuff done, right?
Listen, this is a good morning already. It's a really good morning, and I want to just thank you so much for your leadership. And everybody's saying unity, but everybody's kind of got their fingers crossed behind their back because they say unity, but those other people are butt heads. They don't mean it. That's really what's going on. And so if we can actually trick people into following up on their rhetoric to get some results, I do believe people can start getting addicted to getting the results as opposed to addicted to all the crazy rhetoric. So this has been very, very constructive, and I'm excited about the rest of it. So again, I just want to thank you very much, and I think we will hand it back to our worthy moderator.
Yeah, like I love that. Like, let's let our theme be results, not rhetoric, right?
Absolutely.
We'll hand it back to Randy. It's been great to be with all of you. Thanks, Van, as well.
Thank you, Van and Kelly. Thank you, Senator Coons, Representatives LaHood, McEachin, and Curtis. I think over the past hour, we've identified a number of bipartisan paths forward to address climate change in the United States. As the U.S. re-enters the Paris Agreement, one of the key takeaways from the past 4 days of the Global Energy Forum was that in order for the U.S. to play a global leadership role on climate and ensure that everyone meets their climate goals, a theme that was brought up in the last hour, the U.S. needs to walk the walk. This is going to be hard, but by building partnerships on both sides of the aisle, the U.S. can meet its climate targets, raise its ambition, and can help the rest of the world do so as well. Out of the tragedy of COVID-19, we have an opportunity to address climate change and rebuild the economy in a way that is more equitable and just for all Americans. If there is one energy agenda for 2021, it is to realize this opportunity and set the stage for a more sustainable economy for Americans and for the world. So with that, we will wrap this bipartisan summit and the Global Energy Forum. I want to thank all of the organizations that put this summit together: Green for All, Citizens for Renewable Energy Solutions, Responsible Energy Solutions, and the American Conservation Coalition. When this group started working together in March, we had no idea what COVID-19 would bring. Many of us had never met each other in person, but we've developed a fantastic working relationship and have a sense of what is both possible and ambitious going forward. You're going to be hearing a lot more from this group. With that, I want to thank all my team who helped put this together. And I also want to thank my wife. For those of you who've been following the Global Energy Forum, you know that we couldn't host this event in our office because of the lockdowns in Washington. And so we had 4 of my colleagues move into my house, and my wife moved out for 5 days. And so she is the real hero for putting this together. Without that, this wouldn't be possible. So thank you, Lacey. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today and for the past few days. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon, virtually and hopefully in person. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, Senator.
Great, Steven. Be well, everyone.